At dinner, my daughter-in-law looked at me and said, "Your voice is irritating. Why don't you eat in your room?" I picked up my plate, walked upstairs, and ate alone while tears blurred my vision. The following morning, I made a phone call that would change everything. But let me start from the beginning. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and please tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. It means more than you know. Chapter 1. The Humiliation. My name is Ramona. I'm 67 years old. Last Tuesday, words from my daughter-in-law crushed the last bit of dignity I thought I had left. I was sitting at the dining table Harold and I bought 43 years ago. When we first moved into this house, that table had seen countless family dinners, school projects, birthdays, holidays, memories layered into the very wood. And yet, on that night, in front of my son Darren and his wife Lennox, I was treated like a stranger in my own home. Darren didn't look at me. He just kept cutting his steak, pretending not to notice. It was always the same whenever Lennox put me in my place. He chose silence. The quiet in the room felt like it was pressing against my chest. Finally, I whispered, "Of course," and carried my plate upstairs. My hands shook, not from age, but from hurt. Lennox smiled her little victorious smile and said, "Thanks, Ramona. We just need some quiet to discuss business." Business. The word stung, especially because she didn't know what I knew. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to eat the dinner I had cooked, but it tasted like cardboard. My tears dropped onto the plate. This wasn't the first time she dismissed me like a child, but that night felt different. Final. For 3 years, since Darren married her, I had been walking on eggshells in my own house. 6 months after the wedding, she insisted they move in, saying it was to save money. In truth, it was about control. One whisper at a time, she turned my son against me. "Your mother hovers too much. She still treats you like a kid. Ramona always has to be the center of attention." Every line delivered with that sweet smile that made Darren believe she was simply being honest. I used to defend myself. I tried to explain, to prove I wasn't the monster she painted me as. But each attempt just made Darren sigh and ask why I couldn't get along. Eventually, I stopped fighting. I began apologizing for everything, for cooking his favorite meals, for telling childhood stories, even for existing in my own home. Harold would never have allowed this. My husband was strong, proud, but Harold never had to choose between his dignity and his only son. After he passed away 8 years ago, Darren became my whole world. I just wanted him to be happy. When Darren brought Lennox home, I welcomed her with open arms. I thought she was the woman who would love him, not someone who saw me as competition. But the worst part wasn't her constant jabs. It was losing my son, piece by piece. The boy who once called me 3 times a week now barely gave me 5 minutes. The son who once asked for my advice now acted like my words were worthless. That night, eating alone in my room, I realized something. I was tired of being invisible, and Lennox had no idea that I still held power she could never imagine. The next morning, I made an appointment with my lawyer, not to plot revenge, but to finally review the financial arrangements Harold had set up long ago, arrangements Lennox didn't even know existed. "Mrs. Morrison," Robert Chen said as I sat across from him, "I'm glad you came. There are matters regarding the Montgomery Trust that require your attention." I froze. The Montgomery Trust. Harold had set it up years ago, naming it after his grandfather who started the family construction business. I'd signed the papers back then, but I never paid much attention. Harold always handled the numbers. I handled everything else. Now, Robert slid a thick folder across the desk. "What exactly needs my attention?" I asked, reaching for it with hands that no longer trembled. "Well, Mrs. Morrison, you are now the sole trustee," Robert said calmly, "which means every investment decision passes through you. The trust is performing exceptionally well, currently valued at about $2.8 million. I almost dropped the folder in my hands. "I'm sorry, how much?" Robert smiled with patience. $2.8 million. Your husband was remarkably skilled with investments. The trust has been generating steady returns, and according to his instructions, those returns have been supporting various family ventures. My heart pounded. What kind of ventures? Robert flipped through another file. For example, monthly transfers to Luminous Beauty LLC. That's your daughter-in-law's company, correct? The trust provided around $180,000 in startup funding over the last year and a half, plus $15,000 per month in ongoing support. The room seemed to tilt. Lennox's cosmetics business, the one she bragged about building from nothing, the one she claimed was struggling to find outside investors, was being bankrolled by Harold's money, by my money. "Does my son know about this?" I asked quietly. Robert shook his head. According to Harold's notes, the funding was meant to remain anonymous. He believed the company should appear to succeed on its own, without family pressure or obligation. Obligation. Harold had wanted to protect their pride, to give them independence. He never could have imagined how they'd treat the woman he left behind. "What else?" I asked, my voice trembling but firm. Robert scanned his papers. "There's a mortgage assistance program that has been covering property taxes and maintenance here, as well as the Lake Tahoe cottage, about $4,000 a month. There's also the education fund. It paid for your son's MBA and currently covers his wife's certification programs." Each word struck me like a blow. Every comfort they enjoyed, every advantage they claimed, was built on Harold's legacy, on the fortune that was now under my control. "Robert," I said slowly, "what would happen if I decided to redirect these investments?" He lifted an eyebrow. "That is entirely your right as trustee. You can reallocate funds as long as it fits within the trust's objectives, and if you wish to withdraw support from certain ventures, that too is your decision, though I suggest 30 days' notice for practicality." I stayed in that office another hour, learning about accounts and strategies Harold had quietly built. He had created an empire in silence. And now, it was mine. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: strength. Not the sharp, petty power Lennox flaunted, but the quiet authority that comes from finally realizing your worth. Darren's car was already in the driveway when I pulled in. Through the kitchen window, I saw him and Lennox at the table, laptops open, papers spread out. They were probably planning the next big step for her company. If only they knew their entire foundation rested on the generosity of the woman they had sent to eat alone upstairs. I walked through the house, past their intense business meeting, and climbed the stairs. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't tiptoeing in my own home. I was thinking. That night, as their laughter drifted upstairs, I made my choice. Harold had wanted to help them while protecting their pride, but Harold had never been humiliated at his own dinner table. It was time they learned who they'd been taking for granted. I waited 1 week before making my move. 7 days of enduring Lennox's smug comments about my cooking, my clothes, my outdated ways. 7 days of Darren nodding along like a puppet, desperate to keep the peace. On Thursday morning, I picked up the phone. "Robert," I said, my voice steadier than ever, "I want to discontinue all funding for Luminous Beauty, effective immediately." "Are you sure, Mrs. Morrison? That decision will cause serious financial strain for the company, I'm sure. And suspend the property assistance payments as well. I'll handle those myself." The truth was, I could easily cover taxes and upkeep with Harold's pension and my own income. The trust had simply been padding their lives, padding they never appreciated. By noon, the automatic transfers were gone. Luminous Beauty's safety net had vanished, and they had no idea. I spent the rest of the day in my usual routine: cooking, cleaning, smiling politely. On the surface, I was still the harmless old woman they thought I was. But inside, I was alive again. Friday morning, the first crack appeared. I overheard Lennox on the phone in the kitchen, her voice sharp with panic. "What do you mean the investor pulled out? We had an agreement." She paced by the window, one perfectly manicured hand cutting the air as she spoke into her phone. "No, I don't understand. Everything was approved last month." I sat at the kitchen table folding laundry, invisible as always. Lennox barely glanced at me while arguing with whoever was on the other end. "Find out what happened," she snapped, hanging up. Then her eyes flicked to me. "Ramona, did you hear any of that?" I looked up, my expression mild. "I'm sorry, dear. I was focused on getting these stains out of Darren's shirts. Is everything all right?" She studied my face for a beat, then shrugged. "Just business problems." "Nothing for you to worry about?" Nothing for me to worry about. If only she knew. By Monday, the panic had started. I could hear Lennox constantly on the phone calling banks, investors, anyone who might explain why her funding had dried up overnight. She slammed receivers down, muttered about incompetent advisors, unreliable partners. That evening, Darren came home looking drained. Over dinner served at the dining table they now treated as theirs alone, I heard the tension in their voices. "The bank says someone requested a review of our business accounts," Lennox said, stabbing at her salad. "They won't tell me who, but now everything's frozen pending an investigation." "Investigation of what?" Darren asked. "We haven't done anything wrong." "I know, but apparently someone raised questions about our funding sources. They want documentation for every deposit for the past 2 years. I almost smiled. Robert had warned me this might happen. Large monthly transfers don't just stop without banks noticing, especially transfers from a trust with special tax status. "Maybe Mom knows something," Darren said suddenly. "She's always been good with financial stuff." Lennox let out a bitter laugh. "Your mother?" "Darren, she barely knows how to use an ATM. What could she possibly know about business funding?" From the kitchen doorway, I saw my son's face fall. Even he was beginning to realize how little his wife thought of his family, of me. "I just thought she might have some ideas," he murmured. "The only idea your mother has is how to make everything about herself," Lennox replied. "Remember last week when she tried to monopolize our business dinner? Thank goodness I sent her upstairs before she embarrassed us in front of important people." Important people. She was talking about the night she'd humiliated me, but in her version, I was the problem. Darren didn't argue, but I caught him glancing toward the kitchen with something that looked a lot like guilt. That night, I lay in bed listening to them fight through the thin walls. Their voices rose with their stress. "This doesn't make sense," Darren kept saying. "Money doesn't just vanish. Someone has to know something." "Well, it wasn't your precious mother," Lennox shot back. "She can barely balance a checkbook, let alone interfere with business investments." Can barely balance a checkbook. The woman who'd secretly funded their entire lifestyle for 2 years couldn't balance a checkbook. I pulled Harold's pillow closer and smiled in the darkness. They thought I was helpless, invisible, irrelevant. They had no idea they'd been living off my generosity while treating me like a burden. But that was about to change. Every comfort they'd taken for granted, every opportunity they'd assumed would always be there. Every dollar they'd spent without a thought, it had all come from the woman they'd told to eat dinner alone like a punished child. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd give them something real to worry about. 2 weeks after cutting their funding, I watched my daughter-in-law transform from a polished, confident business owner into someone sharp-edged and desperate. The mask she'd worn for 3 years was slipping. It began with small cracks. Lennox snapping at a grocery clerk when her credit card was declined, her voice rising with clients on the phone, the way she stared at me across the dinner table as if she could somehow read the secrets behind my face. "Your mother's been acting strange?" she told Darren one evening as I prepared their coffee. They were in the living room. "But this old house carries sound." "Haven't you noticed?" Darren sighed. "Strange how?" "I don't know. Different. Like she's watching us." "Mom's always been observant," he said. "Dad used to say she never missed anything." "This is different, Darren. Yesterday I caught her going through the mail before I could get to it, and she's been asking weird questions about my business meetings." I hadn't been going through their mail. I hadn't been asking questions, but paranoia was making Lennox see threats everywhere. The truth was simpler. I'd stopped flinching when she raised her voice. I'd stopped apologizing for taking up space in my own home. When someone's been invisible for years, Even small changes feel seismic. But Lennox was right about one thing. I was different. For the first time since Harold died, I had a purpose beyond surviving. And the real crisis? It hit during their third week without funding. Lennox had been scrambling to find new investors. But serious business people ask serious questions. Questions like, where did your initial capital come from? And, can you provide references from previous backers? Questions Lennox couldn't answer because she'd never known her funding came from Harold's trust. I was at the sink washing dishes when I overheard her on the phone with someone she clearly hoped would rescue her company. I understand you need documentation, she was saying, her voice stretched thin with forced pleasantness. But our previous investor preferred to remain anonymous. Everything was handled through intermediaries. A pause. No, I don't have contact information for the intermediaries. It was arranged through family connections. Another pause, longer this time. What do you mean that sounds irregular? This is a legitimate business with real products and real customers. The conversation ended badly. She slammed the phone down and immediately started dialing another number. That evening, I heard her corner Darren in their bedroom. I was in the hallway bathroom, but this old house carries sound. We need to ask your mother for a loan, Lennox said. A loan? Mom doesn't have that kind of money. How do you know? She's been living in this house for 40 years. Your father was in construction management. They must have savings. Lennox, Mom lives on Social Security and Dad's pension. She clips coupons and shops at thrift stores. Then we'll ask her to co-sign for a business loan. Banks trust older homeowners. I gripped the bathroom sink, a cold fury rising in my chest. After 3 years of being treated like an unwanted guest, after being told my voice was annoying, after countless small humiliations, now they wanted to use my credit, my reputation, my home as collateral for their failing business, the same business that had been thriving on my money all along. I don't know, Darren said. Mom's been through a lot since Dad died. I don't want to stress her with business problems. Stress her out? Darren, this is our future. We're talking about our life together. If Luminous Beauty fails, we lose everything. Maybe we could move out, get our own place, take some pressure off Mom and cut expenses. Move out? Lennox's voice rose, sharp and incredulous. This house is perfect for entertaining clients. The address alone opens doors for us. And your mother loves having us here. We're doing her a favor by keeping her company. A favor. Living in my house, eating my food, dismissing me from my own dinner table, all favors they were doing for poor, lonely me. I left the bathroom and walked quietly to my room. But I could still hear Lennox working on Darren, wearing down his resistance the way she always did. She owes us this much, Lennox was saying, after everything we've sacrificed to take care of her. Do you know how many social events I've turned down because I couldn't leave her alone? How many business dinners we've hosted here instead of going out because someone had to keep an eye on her? Each lie landed like a small stab, but I'd become immune to the pain. What struck me instead was how easily Darren was starting to believe her version of reality, the version where they were my caretakers, sacrificing their independence to look after a helpless old woman. By morning, Darren had been convinced. He knocked on my bedroom door while I was getting dressed, something he hadn't done in months. Mom, can we talk? I opened the door. My son stood there looking uncomfortable, like he had when he was 12 and had broken something valuable. Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? It's about Lennox's business. They're going through a rough patch and we were wondering, we thought maybe you might be able to help. Help how? Well, if you could co-sign for a small business loan, just temporary until they get back on their feet. I looked into my son's eyes and saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions and call them flowers, the same boy now asking me to risk my home to save a business I'd already been secretly funding for 2 years. How much are we talking about? I asked gently. Maybe 50, 60,000 at the most. Such a small amount compared to what I'd already given them, but they didn't know that, and their ignorance had become my power. Let me think about it, I said. This is a big decision. Darren's face lit up with relief. Really? You'll consider it? I'll consider it. But what I was really considering was how far I was willing to let them fall before I decided whether to catch them. I told them I needed a week to decide. What I really needed was time to gather information that would change everything. On Wednesday morning, while Darren was at work and Lennox was at what she called a crucial client meeting, I drove to a small coffee shop downtown to meet someone who'd been quietly watching my family's situation with growing concern. Margaret Chen Roberts' wife had been Harold's secretary for 15 years before he retired. Margaret had helped Harold set up the Montgomery Trust years ago. After his passing, she'd kept in touch, checking in now and then, making sure I was managing. "Ramona," she said as she slid into the booth across from me, "you look better than you have in months." "I feel better," I admitted, "though I'm not sure how long that will last." 2 days earlier, Margaret had called me with information she thought I needed to hear, information about Lennox that suddenly explained so much about the last 3 years. "Tell me what you found," I said, gripping my coffee cup like it was an anchor. Margaret pulled out a folder, glanced around the cafe, then opened it. Inside were printed emails, bank statements, even court documents. "Lennox wasn't completely honest about her past," she said carefully. "This isn't her first marriage." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "She was married before, to a man named Richard Hartwell. Wealthy family. They owned several car dealerships in Connecticut. The marriage lasted 2 years. Margaret handed me a newspaper clipping from 4 years ago. The headline read, "Local businessman granted restraining order against ex-wife." According to court records, Margaret continued, Lennox moved in with Richard's elderly mother right after the wedding. Within 6 months, she had convinced him that his mother was becoming unstable and needed to be moved into care. She took control of the household finances and started isolating the older woman from her friends and family. A chill crept over me despite the warm cafe air. What happened? The mother tried to warn him, but Lennox made her sound confused, like she didn't know what she was saying. Richard didn't see the truth until he discovered $50,000 had been transferred from his mother's account into one of Lennox's business ventures. Margaret turned the page to show me bank statements. She claimed the mother had given her permission, said she was grateful and wanted to help support her business, but eventually, the mother spoke clearly in front of witnesses and said she had never authorized any transfers. Lennox had been forging her signature. I stared at the documents, seeing my own future written in another family's tragedy. "What happened to her?" I whispered. "She passed away 6 months later. Stress, they believe. Richard blames himself for not listening sooner." Margaret's voice softened. "He told me he'd give anything to warn other families about Lennox's pattern. Pattern. The word echoed in my head. "Richard did his own digging after the divorce," Margaret went on. "He found that Lennox has a history of targeting men with elderly mothers or sick relatives. She moves in as the perfect caregiver, slowly takes control, and then isolates the vulnerable family member. I thought of how quickly Lennox had moved into our home, how she'd convinced Darren that I was a burden, that my words, my presence, no longer mattered. "There's more," Margaret said quietly. "Lennox is currently involved with someone else." The words hit me like a physical blow. "With who?" "A man named Trevor Walsh, a business consultant she hired 6 months ago. They've been meeting at the Marriott downtown every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon." She showed me hotel receipts, credit card statements, even photos taken by Richard's private investigator who had continued tracking his ex-wife. "She's been funneling money into these so-called consulting fees," Margaret explained. "They're 3 times higher than the normal rate, and most of the meetings take place in hotel rooms, not offices." I stared at the evidence. A storm of emotions rising in me, rage at the betrayal, but also relief that I finally understood what I was dealing with. Lennox wasn't just a difficult daughter-in-law, she was a predator who had set her sights on my family. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because Richard wanted you to know. He's seen this same pattern destroy 3 families already, and he can't stand by and let it happen again. He's even willing to testify if you need him. I gathered the papers, my hands surprisingly steady. What does he think I should do? He thinks you should protect yourself and your son before it's too late, but he also thinks— Margaret hesitated. He thinks Lennox has gotten careless this time. She's used to dealing with confused elderly relatives and men who give in easily. She's not used to someone with the resources and the determination to fight back. I left the coffee shop that afternoon feeling like I'd been handed a weapon I hadn't known I needed, but I also knew that having information and using it were two very different things. That evening, I sat in my bedroom and called Darren's cell phone. "Mom, is everything okay? You never call my cell. I need you to come home early tomorrow," I told Darren over the phone. "There's something important we need to discuss about the loan." "Of course. Should Lennox be there too?" I glanced at the folder of evidence sitting on my nightstand. "Actually, I'd prefer to talk to you alone first, just to make sure I understand all the details." "Sure, Mom. Whatever you need." But what I needed was for my son to finally see the truth about the woman he'd married, and tomorrow I was going to make sure he couldn't look away anymore. Darren came home early Thursday afternoon, stepping into the kitchen where I was baking his favorite cookies. For a moment, he looked like the little boy who used to rush home from school to tell me about his day. "Something smells amazing," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble for our talk." "It's no trouble," I said softly. "Difficult conversations go better with comfort food." I poured him a glass of milk and set a plate of warm cookies between us, just as I had when he was young and we needed to talk about hard things. "Mom, about the loan," he began. I held up my hand. "Before we discuss any loan, there are things you need to know. About Lennox, about your marriage, about what's been happening in this house." I opened Margaret's folder and slid the first document across the table. Darren's face went pale as he read the headline: "Local businessman granted restraining order against ex-wife." "Mom, where did you get this?" "From someone who cares about our family, someone who's watched Lennox destroy other families and couldn't stay silent." I walked him through everything: the first marriage, the pattern of targeting older relatives, the systematic isolation and financial exploitation. With each piece of evidence, I watched my son's face shift: confusion, disbelief, horror. "This can't be right," he whispered, staring at the hotel receipts. "Lennox wouldn't. She loves me." "Does she, sweetheart?" I asked quietly. "When was the last time she defended you to anyone? When was the last time she put your feelings before her own?" Darren ran his fingers through his hair, the way he used to when homework got too hard. "But the business meetings," he began. "Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at the Marriott aren't business meetings," I said. "They're an affair. Lennox has been using company money from your father's trust to pay for hotel rooms with her consultant." "Trust fund?" Darren looked up sharply. "What trust fund?" I took a deep breath. It was time for the final revelation. "Your father set up the Montgomery Trust before he died. For the past 2 years, it's been funding Lennox's business. Every dollar she thought came from anonymous investors was actually from your father's legacy, money that's now under my control." Darren stared at me like I'd just told him I was living a double life. "You've been funding Luminous Beauty all this time." "Unknowingly at first," I said. "Your father wanted to help you both succeed, but he also wanted you to feel independent. He never imagined his generosity would lead to his widow being treated like an unwanted burden." I showed him the bank statements, the trust documents, the proof that every comfort they'd enjoyed was built on Harold's money that stopped flowing the day after Lennox told me to eat in my room. "The funding crisis you've been panicking about?" I continued. "It happened because I withdrew support. I got tired of financing people who couldn't show me basic respect in my own home." Darren's hands trembled as he set the papers down. "Mom, I had no idea. I swear I never knew about any of this." "I know you didn't," I said gently, "but what you did know was how Lennox treated me, and you chose to allow it. Again and again." Just then we heard a car in the driveway. Darren's eyes darted to the door. "What do I do?" How do I face her knowing all this? You don't have to do anything right now, I told him. Just watch. Listen. Pay attention to how she behaves when she thinks she's in control. The front door opened and Lennox's voice floated in from the hallway. Darren, are you home? I have amazing news. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, practically glowing with excitement. Trevor found us new investors, she announced. One major investor who wants to fund the entire expansion. We're meeting him tomorrow to sign contracts. I watched my son's face as he processed her words. Trevor. The man she'd been seeing at the Marriott was now supposedly bringing in investors for the business, the same business already built on money she'd never known about. That's great, Darren said carefully. Who is this investor? Someone Trevor's worked with before, Lennox replied breezily. Very private, very exclusive. He wants to remain anonymous, but he's willing to invest $200,000. $200,000 more than the trust had provided over 2 years. I found myself wondering where this mysterious money was really coming from and what Lennox was promising in return. We'll finally be able to expand properly, she continued, then her eyes flicked to me sitting at the table. Her expression hardened the moment she saw me at the table. Ramona, did you make a decision about co-signing that loan? Because if this other investor comes through, we might not need it. Actually, I said calmly, I did make a decision. I won't be co-signing anything. Lennox's smile faltered. Why not? Because I don't think your business model is sustainable. Her mask slipped. What would you know about business models? She snapped. You've never worked a day in the corporate world. You don't understand the first thing about building a company. Darren cleared his throat. Actually, Lennox, Mom has been involved in your business more than you know. Something in his tone made her freeze. What do you mean? Tell her, Mom, Darren said quietly. Tell her where the money really came from. I stood slowly, enjoying the way her confidence began to crumble. The Montgomery Trust has been funding Luminous Beauty since the beginning. Every anonymous investor, every mysterious transfer, it was all from my husband's estate. Money that I control. Lennox went pale. That's impossible. Is it? I asked. You never wondered why investors disappeared when the funding stopped? Why no one could give you direct contacts for your so-called backers? I opened the folder and spread the papers across the table. 2 years of transfers, records, and bank statements. 2 years of building your dream with my money while treating me like I was worthless. While meeting Trevor at the Marriott and paying for it with company funds that came straight from my husband's trust. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she turned to Darren. You can't believe this. She's just bitter, jealous of our success. But Darren was already holding the hotel receipts. Is this nonsense too, Lennox? These charges for your consulting fees, always on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always when you disappeared for hours? The fight went out of her all at once. She slumped against the doorframe, suddenly looking years older. I want you out, Darren said quietly. Pack your things. Leave tonight. She tried once to argue, once more to explain, to twist the story back in her favor, but the evidence was too clear, and for the first time, Darren truly saw her. That evening, she left with 2 suitcases and her car. No screaming, no demands, just the quiet defeat of someone whose game had been exposed. When the door shut behind her, Darren and I sat at the kitchen table, the house suddenly feeling larger, lighter. Mom, he said softly, I owe you the biggest apology of my life. You don't owe me an apology, sweetheart, I told him. You were manipulated by someone who was very good at manipulation. But I should have seen it. I should have protected you. I reached across the table and took his hand. You were protecting your marriage. That's what good husbands do. You just didn't know you were married to someone who didn't deserve that protection. 3 months later, Darren moved back into his childhood bedroom while the divorce worked its way through the courts. It wasn't the life either of us had planned, but it was honest, something our home hadn't felt like in years. The Montgomery Trust remained under my care, but I used it differently now. Smarter. Harold's money went to scholarships for young people, to programs that supported the elderly against financial exploitation, and toward building a secure future for my son, the son who had finally found his way back to me. As for Lennox, she vanished from our lives completely. Through Margaret, I heard she'd moved to Florida and was already circling another family. I thought about warning them, but I'd learned the truth. Some people only believe the danger when they see it for themselves. Now, on quiet evenings, Darren and I cook together and eat at the dining room table, our table. My voice is no longer annoying. My presence is no longer unwelcome. I've reclaimed my place in my own home. I've reclaimed my voice. The empire Harold built is still here, but now I rule it wisely. And now, I want to ask you, the one listening to my story, what would you have done if you were in my place? Have you ever faced something like this in your own family? Leave a comment below, I'd love to hear from you. And while you're here, I've left 2 more stories on screen that are channel favorites, and I promise they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the very end.